move to Senate Bill 315. We're going to move, we had an extensive hearing on Tuesday on this. I know there have been some conversations back and forth on the issue. Let me do this. Let me call on Mr. Coomer to set the table on this. I know there were some conversations between Mr. Coomer and Mr. Setzler on our approach. Mr. Setzler was subcommittee chair on 315. Mr. Coomer is the House sponsor. So let me ask Mr. Coomer to set the table on that, and then we'll proceed directly to a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to be traveling on a motion for passage of LC 298074S, which is the version the committee had before it on Tuesday. I believe Chairman Setzler intends to offer an amendment, or I can offer the amendment to change the word on line 18, to change the word "and" to "or," so that subsection 2C would read cybersecurity active defense measures that are designed to prevent or detect unauthorized computer access, or I'm amenable to that. The amendment is good with me, and I would ask the members to support that amendment and then support passage of the underlying bill. And Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'm happy to make an argument for the bill in general, but I don't know if you want me to do that now or later.
No, I think we exhausted that on Tuesday. Honestly, it was a good discussion, good perspective on either side. But I think what it comes down to is that I think we do have to act, given the time, where we are in the current reality in the context of when the original statutes were passed on this subject matter, which I believe were in the early 1990s. Mr. Setzler, did you want to add anything to that, or just go ahead and go to the motion and we'll go from there? Mr. Setzler.
I'd like to move due pass LC 298074S.
Mr. Setzler moves due pass of Senate Bill 315 LC 298074S. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by the Vice Chair. Are there any amendments, Mr. Coomer?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would amend by striking the word "and" on line 18 and replacing it with the word "or."
Mr. Coomer moves to amend SB 315 LC 298074S on line 18 by striking the word "and" inserting the word "or." On line 18, striking the word "and" inserting the word "or." Is there any objection to the amendment? Is there any objection to the amendment? Seeing none, the amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments? Mr. Bodie.
Yes. Mr. Chair, we have an amendment. I want to amend when we have subsection B, access to.
Let me ask you to speak into the mic, because
I'm sorry. It's not on. I don't think it's on.
Yeah, it's on now.
It's on now.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, I would like to amend subsection B, which is line 17. You all have the amendment, the proposed amendment in your package.
This is AM 292793. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
AM 292793. Is there any member who does not have the amendment? Mr. Bodie.
Yes. So what we want to do is pretty much I'm not going to move forward on the unlawful act that we talked about on Monday as the proposed First Amendment, but we will be moving forward on the 2 and 3 proposed amendments. One deals with legitimate business activity, which is division number 1. Division number 2, we're talking about by any individual who's acting within the scope of his or her employment. We talked about that on Monday as being the innocent employee clause. And more importantly, division 3, by any person that upon discovering their vulnerability reports such vulnerability in writing to the vulnerable person. I know on Monday we had a lot of discussion on whether a hacker, and Chairman Setzler brought this up, can a hacker actually go and hack into a system, find the vulnerabilities and say, look, this is your vulnerabilities. What we want to do by stating that unauthorized and putting the way Ledge Council drafted it, that won't necessarily be an issue, because On line 12, we're dealing with unauthorized computer access. So we're already stating that these are individuals that have authorized access to a computer, and it's not hackers that are going to come and say, look, we found a vulnerability in your system and put it in writing. So what we want to do is protect, as we had witnesses on Monday, the researchers, the students, people that are there lawfully or with good intentions, so they won't be the ones that get caught up in a misdemeanor type of situation. We don't want a court to look at these individuals, them to be charged, and they're being charged, and that's not the legislative intent of this bill. So what I want to do is make sure we protect those college researchers, those individuals that are doing the right thing by disclosing and writing these vulnerabilities and not having them being subject to litigation.
All right, discussion on the amendment, Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Proposed amendment, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'll just say that I'm opposed to the amendment, but I'd like to walk through each line. Obviously, lines 2 and 3 are not problematic. That's the language we have in the bill now. Line 4 is problematic. This is by any individual who's acting within the scope of his or her employment. The problem is that limits the exception to people who are employees of another. So an independent contractor, students, as Representative Bodie mentioned, or others who are doing this work independently are unprotected if you accept this language. So I think that is very problematic in the sense that it's a way to catch people, not intended to, but I think it's a way that you'll catch people who are independent contractors not employed by someone else while they're doing this work. And then as regarding the third subsection, lines 5 and 6, the problem there is Chairman Setzler pointed out the other day, and we talked about extensively in the subcommittee, the problem is you're giving essentially a get-out-of-trouble-free card to someone who does something malicious and then simply says at some point, anytime in the future, they say, well, I'm reporting this vulnerability in writing, and I'm doing it voluntarily, so you can't touch me. That would actually be counterintuitive to the underlying bill and to the underlying code section, because you a lot of times what's going to happen is somebody is going to report that there's a vulnerability, and oh, by the way, I'm exploiting that vulnerability by charging you money to give you control of your machine back. So we don't want to encourage that kind of behavior, and lines 5 and 6 do encourage that kind of behavior.
Mr. Chairman, I respond to the whip very respectfully to the whip. In regards to lines 5 and 6, if we had an individual that unlawfully, such as a hacker, come and say in writing that we have discovered these vulnerabilities, i.e. after the person has hacked the system, they still will be guilty of computer theft or computer trespass, which in this case, based on conversations on Monday, these are higher level offenses. These are felonies. So essentially, if they came in that direction or in that manner, the person is now going to be accused of a felony instead of a misdemeanor. So we still have the same essence of the bill of what we want to do here, but we're also going to protect those student researchers at the same time.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, all of the kinds of activities you're talking about protecting, which I agree should be protected, are covered in the language currently in lines 17 through 19 in LC 298074S. It is my intention to protect exactly the same kind of activity you're talking about protecting. I think that the amendment goes further and protects bad actors as well as innocent actors, and that's why I'm opposed to the amendment.
Okay. Further discussion on the amendment, Mr. Setzler.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to rehash too much ground that's been covered, but I would say to maybe expand upon what Whip Coomer said. And I want to do this with proportion. I'm saying it to both committee members and members of the public that are here, just for emphasis, that lines 5 and 6 of the amendment, if a person hacks a website and they're within your system, then an email to the person who you've hacked that says, I've hacked your system, I've got a vulnerability I want to show you, is, and I'm not trying to overstate this is exactly what it does. It's a get out of jail free card. So that by virtue of sending somebody a written communication, they're then exempt from prosecution, and they simply need to prove that by preponderance of the evidence. I mean, I know it's not Representative Bodie's intention or that, but the effect of line 5 and 6 is that when you've, by a person upon discovering a vulnerability, they've gotten into the network, they've gotten in without authorization and intentionally, simply by reporting such vulnerability in writing, they have an exemption. I mean, this creates a circumstance where people who are hacking, whether they've been caught or they think they may be getting caught, simply by virtue of in writing sending an email to the vulnerable person, your system has a vulnerability, you need to understand it. It's an automatic exemption by preponderance of the evidence. I just think I think it gets the purpose of the bill, Mr. Chairman. And I know that's not the gentleman's intention with the amendment.
Ms. Dickerson? Okay. Ms. Price? Okay. Okay. Mr. Bodie, do you want to proceed?
Yes. At
Okay.
this time, I want to move that we, as this committee, accept the amendment AM 292793.
Mr. Bodie moves on Amendment 292793 to the House substitute on SB 315. All in favor of the gentleman's amendment signify by raising your hand. Opposed? The amendment fails. Are there any further amendments? Are there any further additional amendments? Ms. Kendrick? Okay,
I don't have an amendment, I just had a question.
sure.
On the back, the portion about venue on line 29 that talks about residence, is the usual language for residence in the code principal place of abode, or is residence defined elsewhere in the code? That's probably a lead counsel question, but just wondering.
Is that a question for Ms. Travis?
Or whoever
Did you have a
knows the
question for Ms.
answer.
Travis?
For whoever knows the answer to it.
Could you restate the question for Ms. Travis?
So on line 29, we're using residence, and I know usually in the code, the language is principal place of abode. Does residence have a different meaning than principal place of abode, or?
I have to tell you, I don't know.
Okay.
I recognize that both of those terms are used, and I don't have my handy dictionary to tell you what residence means according to our code.
Okay.
I will tell you that I believe this language was supported and asked for by the Attorney General's office.
All right, okay. Any further discussion? We have an underlying motion and a second on on a committee substitute, LC 298074S. Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Chair is in doubt. All in favor of the underlying motion of do pass by substitute, please raise your hand. As amended. But it is amended, but we're saying by substitute for purposes of drafting. Opposed? And the motion is adopted. Thank you, Mr. Coomer.